Drawing is not form, but a way of seeing form. Drawing is not what you see, but what you must make others see. Drawing is not form, it is your understanding of form. You must do over the same subject 10 times, 100 times. In art, nothing must appear accidental, not even a movement.
Now, how are you going to look?
Would you look away again?
Down a bit, maybe. Just down a bit, yeah. Just keep your eyes still for a bit.
Do you always start with the eyes?
Yes. Or the nose. But mostly with the eyes, yeah.
Have you always drawn a lot?
Yes. When I first went to art school in Bradford, you just did it for years. I mean, that's all you had to do. But I always loved doing it. Yeah, I like drawing best of all.
Marks made on a surface with a pencil or pen, coloured crayon, bit of chalk or piece of charcoal. This film is about what goes on in that particularly intense and primary act of looking and projection of the world that we call drawing. Why do we keep on drawing? Surrounded as we all are now by photography, cinema and television, what can drawing still reveal to us that these more elaborate and mechanical means of visual expression cannot? In fact, drawing is probably one thing most of us have done at some time in our lives. It may only have been the first scribbles we made as children, or our casual doodles by the telephone. But whatever the kinds of drawing, be they crude or sophisticated, they are all only ever made by means of a simple implement held by fingers on the end of an arm. All drawing is never further away from the human hand than that. This film is about why drawing has mattered to artists of the past and what they've said about it, and in what ways it has continued to matter to modern artists of this century, despite the many radical shifts of direction that visual art has taken during the last few decades. And the film has been made in collaboration with many people, including the art historian Philip Rawson, who's been concerned with drawing all his life and who discusses many aspects of the subject in a conversation provoked by a viewing of sequences throughout the film. And among the contemporary artists taking part are David Hockney, drawing one of his favourite subjects, Celia Birtwell, the English caricaturist and illustrator Ralph Steadman, in his studio as well as with some of the regulars in the local pub, and the American Jim Dine, well known in the 60s as a pop artist and now increasingly preoccupied with the activity and processes of drawing, not only on paper but also on pottery made by a friend, Dave Olheim, whose portrait he is drawing.
I prefer to use charcoal like this because I can keep on rubbing it and sanding it and scraping at it because the paper is very thick. I had this paper made. It's a tough paper that becomes part of the drawing, almost like a relief then. I also like the fact that with charcoal, the model can keep on moving. And it's nice that I mean, I like the challenge of being able to go back and erasing and if it's good once, getting rid of it and doing it again. I mean, I figure if I can do it once, I could do it again, and it probably is more interesting the next time. I found something else then, maybe. If I was using pencil, I would make a smaller drawing, I think, just because of the size the mark it makes.
Have you ever drawn Day before, Jim?
Never, never. I wanted to make the drawing of Day because we collaborate. And I just thought it was a nice occasion to celebrate the collaboration in some public way, rather than haggling over business like we usually do. I was going to kill myself in America. And, I mean, I know no technology, and she's a good friend of mine. So it seemed like a sociable, efficacious thing to do. You know? I didn't want to decorate pottery. I wanted to make full-blown drawings on pottery, because I love pots, for one thing, but I also thought it would be nice to see a real drawing on pottery rather than a border or dots. I chose to make plant drawings on the pots because I thought it was appropriate rather than people or things. It seemed in some sort of pottery tradition, and I think they look very pretty on these pots, on her pots. What I first try to do is I try to leave my traces and make marks that are guides for me to how to build the face, rather than to try and capture the likeness immediately. I'm trying to make a surface that interests me.
The figure's the hardest thing to draw, without a doubt. I mean, it's easier drawing an apple. You know, it sits still, doesn't move. You don't have to give it life. You don't, you know, I mean.
Does it make a big difference that you've drawn Celia so often before?
Sorry, that
you've drawn Celia so many times before?
Well, yes. I know a lot about the face because I've looked at it closely. If you've drawn it, it means you've looked at it closely. Also, if I've drawn someone before, somehow I'm less bothered about the likeness all the time. And I concentrate more on trying to make the drawing, you know, have proper form or something. Whereas sometimes if you're concentrating on a likeness, you lose other things, really. Well, Celia's like everybody else. They have a few faces, don't they? People look different at different times. It depends how they feel. Last time I was drawing her, didn't you say our relationship wasn't so good and the drawings looked terrible? Celia thought so, yeah. The thing is, drawing with a line, it's much more difficult drawing softness than if I were drawing with a pencil. She looks soft today, doesn't she?
Do you agree with those who say that drawing is less about seeing than making something?
Well, I couldn't answer that question while I'm drawing. It's certainly a lot about looking. In drawing that's what it is. You're looking and you select what you're going to emphasize or put in. Well, I think I'll start again. Should I start again on this drawing? I think it's all out of proportion. The head is... Proportion is wrong, isn't it? Really? Terrible. No?
I don't know. I mean, it's...
I think so. Less proportion to that is wrong.
What, you crossed it out?
Yeah.
Perhaps you're bored with that face, that's the trouble.
Bored with the old face? We'll start again. Well, I have to cross them out because there was a drawing sold at Sotheby's about a few weeks ago. You heard about it, and it said on it, I'd drawn Mo, and I thought the drawing was terrible, and he said, oh, don't throw it away again or tear it up. Just give it to me, put on my wall. So I wrote on it for Mo, this is not a very good drawing, and signed it. It was on sale at Sotheby's about 2-3 weeks ago. Bloody Mo, you see. Somebody obviously didn't take notice of my little message. So I cross them out, and then it's very clear. I painted a little picture of it, very realistic, and then I thought it was terrible, and I cut the canvas up and threw it in a dustbin in France. But then suddenly half a face appears framed, and Mo had saved half of it, so I called it, well, I said, if you've got it now, we might as well call it something, so we'll call it Half a Mo.
Half a Mo.
Yeah. Done quickly. The reason I think that's not very good is if you look through there, that section from this arm here and here, you can't feel the volume. There's no body between the lines. Whereas here, which is a much better drawing, from this line here and this line here and here and here, you feel his hands in his pockets, you feel the volume of the coat itself, then the way it hangs down, and you know, with a few lines, you know what's going on. If you can't do that, no matter what the drawing's like, it's terrible.
What is it for a drawing to represent something? Asks the English writer Richard Volheim. Drawing depends upon a skill that exists prior to drawing. The skill of seeing three-dimensional things in a flat, two-dimensional configuration. A man draws. He draws a line. He draws more lines. Now he has drawn a cube. Of course there is no cube there. All that is there is a drawing that represents a cube. Just as we could have a drawing of a unicorn, of a boat, of water, of rain. What do we mean when we say that a drawing represents something? How can a drawing look like a unicorn? Any drawing looks more like any other drawing than it looks like whatever it is a drawing of. In the first place, a drawing becomes an object through representing a single unified space. And in turn, the drawing, through becoming an object, can symbolize as well as represent things outside itself.
Looking at it from here, I just don't believe how of a great way they're doing it. You know, it's just incredible. As I said, I'm Australian. I don't see too much of this where I come from, and it's quite nice to look at it to see if it can be done just by looking at a person and take a sketch.
What do you look for when you're looking at someone being drawn?
Especially at the eyes, the reflection of the light in the eyes.
I just don't believe the actual way that they do it, looking straight into their eyes and saying, right, this is where I'm going to make a line, and it comes out perfect. You know, it's just like a camera.
Seeing this artist drawing from a photograph reminds one how powerfully we're under the influence of the idea that art has to represent things in the same way as a photograph does. We're surrounded by photographs in the newspapers. We see photographic images virtually on the TV screen, and somehow we feel that if we're going to take a true record of anything, it's got to look more or less as a photograph does. But I think actually this is false. In fact, drawing imitating photography is one of the things that drawing can do. It's one of the things that drawing can do very well. But on the other hand, the whole point of drawing, as far as I'm concerned, is to do exactly those things that the photograph can't. And in fact, the way in which the photographic image has conditioned our view not only of art but of reality has been commented on by many other people.
The writer John Berger has observed how the advent of the cinema and television means that we now define drawings and paintings as static images, whereas a drawing or a painting presupposes a different view of time. The photographed image has been selected for preservation. The drawn image contains the experience of looking. From each glance, a drawing assembles a little evidence, but it consists of the evidence of many glances which can be seen together. A drawing, while it is being made, slowly questions an event's appearance, and in doing so reminds us that appearances are always constructions with a history.
And the historical point of departure for this kind of static image seems to me to be Ingres, the great early 19th century French artist. Now, Ingres was one of the people who made his life's work the recording of the physical presence of people sitting still face to face with him. And you feel always from his drawings that there was a kind of living relationship between himself and the sitter. Now, this whole conception of portrait drawing and portrait art as being the literal rendering of somebody who is sitting face to face with you and having some sort of relationship with you, I think became more or less fixed with Ingres.
What do you think the difference is between a drawing and a photograph?
It seems like a drawing shows more of the person. It's not done in just an instant. The person has more time to look at you and capture your personality.
That is really the virtue of portrait drawing as against portrait photography, that the artist and the sitter really should have some sort of relationship. Now, this kind of relationship, even though it's only very temporary, can actually affect a drawing in a way that it can't really affect a photograph, because a drawing takes time to make, and during the time that the artist is making his drawing, he is gathering all sorts of threads of impression, little intuitions about the character of the person that he's actually drawing. And these, if he's a good artist, will find their way through down his arm into his pencil and actually end up in the drawing. He is getting onto the paper more than is actually immediately before his eye. You like it?
Yes. I look kind of sad or angry or something.
Roll it down.
Look sad.
And of course, the most important point of all is that drawing is not just seeing, it's making. Goethe said, art is image making long before it's beautiful. And when one sees children at work, one can see how they are learning through their hands and in all sorts of other ways to register and symbolize the world through language, through the forms of words. And they even learn to symbolize something as abstract as time. And then when they actually come to produce an image, they produce it from their imaginations.
This bit of the boat.
That's bits of the boat. And what's that middle bit of the boat?
Flag.
A flag. And that's your house? Which is the window in your house?
if you look at the actual marks they're making on the paper, they're relating images to the axes, that is to say the right angle edges of the paper, which means that they're, so to speak, ordering a world. Secondly, they're actually projecting something that comes from inside them onto the flat surface of the paper, which is an actually existing thing, which means, so to speak, they're realizing it in the true sense of the word. And then, thirdly, what they're in fact doing with the pencil point is making a line. And what they're doing is outlining the face, the body, and then drawing little lines for the arms. So what they're really doing is what we can call perhaps conceptualizing the world around them, creating images of their own awareness of how the world is and how it works. The thing about children's drawings, of course, is that in a way they're only one concept thick. The concepts they use, a little round disc for the head and little notes for the other parts of the body, are single and simplified, whereas a more sophisticated artist has got the problem of combining all sorts of different concepts into a single image.
What's that a picture? How much of the kind of concepts which they're dealing with universal and independent of the culture in which they're growing up?
If you compare the drawings of very young children from many different countries, they really are extraordinarily similar. That at a certain level, at the childish level, before they've had a chance to become very strongly influenced by the culture in which they're being brought up, they do share a very universal system of recording.
Is it your house or just any house?
It's my house.
Your house.
What shall I do?
Who lives in your house?
Me and my mummy and daddy. Mum. She's sitting on the chair.
Who is?
Martha.
Martha. And who's Martha?
My sister.
And how many floors have your house got?
Do you know which bedroom mine is? 5.
Right. And what are you drawing now?
Stairs.
Oh, the stairs. Can you tell me what all these different things are in your house?
Beds, TVs, floors, carpet, chairs, perfumes, couches. Nothing counts.
And?
Nothing counts.
Nothing else. I've got here one of the drawings which one of those children were doing, aged about 4. And what is fascinating is that it started off with a rather conventional drawing of a house, and then it gradually developed detail, and then it became a kind of X-ray of her house. And so what is being drawn is not what could conceivably be seen, but what she knows exists within the house.
That's right. In a sense, it's a kind of diagram. It's a diagram of her special knowledge of the house, and the interesting thing to me is that all the floors have got deep pile carpets on, and of course a child of 4 knows the carpets, and they matter very much to a child compared to how they would matter to us. But this business of drawing what one knows to be there isn't, of course, confined to children. Quite a lot of adult artists have done it, of course. It's one of the characteristics of Stone Age hunter art, that they draw a kind of X-ray image of the insides of the animals they hunt. But in the 20th century, many very sophisticated Western artists have used some technique based upon this idea, that is to say, representing more than can be seen. And Paul Klee is one very important artist who did this. He was very much concerned with representing what lay behind the visible.
The legend of the childishness of my drawing must have originated from those linear compositions of mine in which I tried to combine a concrete image, say that of a man, with the purest representation of the linear element. Had I wished to present man as he is, then I should have had to have used such a bewildering confusion of lines that the result would have been vagueness beyond recognition. And anyway, I do not wish to present the man as he is, but only as he might be. And thus I could arrive at a happier association between my vision of life and pure artistic craftsmanship.
Klee went back right into the fundamentals of drawing. He talked about going for a walk with a line, that is to say, going for a walk with his pencil tip. And by the simplest possible means, this single line, he succeeds in producing great depths and complex metaphors within a very, very small format. And Klee's art, of course, is very witty. It's not entirely solemn. He makes a kind of play between what we see and what we know about the real world.
There's a New Yorker cartoon of a school, and on the wall outside the school is a drawing, and it says mummy, a crude stick lady, and then there's a stick lady walking towards the school to collect her child. I thought so it was realistic, really, the drawing was.
What we're going to do today is to think again about your mum. And I'm going to give you a nice big piece of paper, and you see if you can make it really look like your mum. All right?
In the early children's drawings, they're just finding a kind of sign for everything, and the likeness and resemblance isn't a dominating aspect of their sort of critical relationship to their own drawing, but it is very developed in these children only 2 years older.
This issue of the sign is actually very important because really what they're developing is more sophisticated signs. They're making their signs capable of containing more conceptual material.
And sometimes ladies wear patterned things, don't they, which is nice, flowery patterns.
Drawings, after all, they are just marks on paper made with a point, and so they can only be, in some sense, signs. We have to read a drawing rather as we read from a page of a book. And a drawing which uses very sophisticated signs, like this drawing by Dürer turned into a woodcut, can, by means of quite simple lines, convey a very great deal of feeling, information, knowledge, by signs which, in a sense, need be no more complicated in their superficial appearance than the signs of much simpler drawings.
What about the technical skills?
Yes, it's partly a question of motor skills, certainly, command of the hand, but it's also the development of an ability to measure proportions. That is to say, the eye and the nose and the mouth are put much more dearly in what we would call the right place than they are put in the drawings of even younger children. And so there was definitely a kind of judgment about the world developing, a judgment about what is seen.
Do you think that looks like you? But you've got freckles, haven't you? Why doesn't it look like you then? Thank you.
They don't hang up down like that, like she's done.
What doesn't hang down? Her arms. Can you tell me, Deborah, why it looks like me?
You've got kinds of fringe and this one has.
What am I doing in your picture?
You're standing up.
Just standing. What's that on that one over there?
Nails.
The fingernails, are they? And what about this bit here? What's that?
These hands are absolutely marvellous. This boy, Gary, he really feels his hands as, in some sense, implements, or they've got a kind of strength to them, and the nails are very, very carefully drawn. And so you know that in some special way he has a particular attachment or value for hands.
It's me.
It's you. Anything else?
There's one with the left with their legs.
Maybe it's because you can't see them.
Can't see them. There they are.
But they've got no legs.
No.
How did you know that that was what you look like?
Because I've seen myself on the mirror.
You have you?
We have all kinds of memories stocked in our minds, and it's these memories, in a sense, we use for drawing, especially if we're doing imaginative drawings. But there's another thing too, and that is that no child draws, so to speak, out of the blue, out of nothing. Every artist, every draftsman, grows up in what one can call a graphic culture. We, so to speak, pick up the going language of graphic signs. Now, with children, of course, that'll be to a very large extent comics, I suppose TV images as well, especially TV animation films, which they're especially interested in. And so one must expect that their drawings will reflect this going graphic language.
So, a little what I'd expect. All children's drawings have great charm, you see. It's incredibly charming, even the way they do the eyes and the nose. It's a delight. But that's not. Actually, that's nice. That's a sadness in that face, isn't it? Rather kind of...
But did you do a lot of drawing at that age, or not?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know where they are when I was, say, 5 or 6. My mother has drawings done later, but the earliest drawings I've still got in Bradford, they'd gone out of this stage and begun to be attempts at sophisticated looking, really.
Going back to this stage occasionally?
Yes, oh yeah. Well, I did it at the time. I just, of course this is 12, 15 years ago, and modern art seemed to be very important to me then. And in modern art you simply could not sit down and draw a figure like Ingres. You couldn't do it. But suddenly I realized that it was legitimate.
But have you always loved drawing?
Have I always drawn?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Not very well. I'm left-handed, and I couldn't make my hand work for a long time. I seem to have some sort of learning disabilities that way. I mean, about my hand registering with my brain. So it's taken me 20 years to, like, harness it. As I draw, I smear right across it, and for a long time, it hindered my so-called drawing speech because I was unable to speak clearly that way. But really, I've learned mainly by looking and drawing, and by forcing myself to draw.
Do you think there's any way of teaching drawing, and even as an art
To little kids?
Or even as an art school? I mean,
Yeah, sure. Oh, I do. Oh, sure. Sure, there's a way to teach drawing.
And how would you teach drawing?
You teach drawing, but in front of something, drawing from something. It needn't even be a model. It can be a still life. And you keep forcing, you keep telling them to tear it up, to observe it more closely. What you really have to teach is observation, something closely observed. If something is closely observed by a gifted person, it can be a beautiful thing. You know, if they aren't gifted, there's not much you can do. You can say, move a line here, move a line there, but meanwhile, they've been made to look at something. That's what it's about. It's about looking at things. Really.
What you're drawing. People doing carrots, I'm going to come round and help you with those because they're a bit complicated and you'll need bits picked out for you. Try and fill the whole page up, so start with a nice big shape before you start getting too fiddly. And remember, you're not making pictures, you're looking at what you're drawing and you're trying to get it down onto the paper. Okay? Right, you're off then, go on then. You can either try and draw the carrot as it is here, so you've got a great big carrot about that size, yeah? With this nice green stalk coming out at the top and over to this side of the page, or if you like, and it's really very interesting, if you want to take just one bit of their little leaf and try and copy that very largely. So you decide, just try and fill the page up with it, okay? You got the right sort of charcoal? Same with you, do you hear what I was saying? Don't try and compose it in the middle of the paper. You've got a lovely big bit of white paper. Lovely big bit of white paper, so try and fill it up with the drawing. Don't get too fiddly.
It looks very... Well, it's
Yeah,
unusual.
Yes, how though? Why is it unusual? All right, let's have a look at the back there. You've lost the size of these leaves, haven't you? You're concentrating so hard on this bit, and it's quite nice to see that you're losing the shape of the leek. It's round there, okay? Going up thin and narrowly. Remember how we talked about how the green went into the white? The colour changes as the shape changes.
These huge drawings really make the children feel that they're getting inside the thing that they're drawing, the way they sprawl out on the paper. In fact, scale in drawing matters very much, and these drawings, drawing on this scale like this for the children, must help them to feel they're getting to know the object that they're drawing, the cut fruits, in a most intimate way. In fact, what they're really doing is filling the shell of the fruit with a very great deal of notation of detail. And the fact that this detail has to be really accurate demands observation on a rather different scale from standing away from a thing and drawing it small.
Okay, they're a bit hard and a bit round. How can you draw those? See if you can draw one for me here. I think you need a bigger bit of charcoal, actually. Here, Linda. Just try. Just go into it, you know. Do it nice and big here. Come on.
In fact, they have to notice the actual shape of the seeds and the little protrusions on the plant.
How do you describe it? A bit like that? A bit like jelly. Yours aren't very much like jelly, are they?
And someone who has drawn in this way may very well have their intelligence stimulated to, for example, scientific observation, scientific analysis, and this, of course, is one of the many functions of art.
So when you're bringing it out,
Isn't it also true, though, that at certain periods of history, the use of drawing and scientific investigation have coincided in a particularly intense kind of way? For instance, the anatomical drawings of the 18th century English artist George Stubbs, and perhaps most famously, Leonardo da Vinci 2 centuries earlier in Italy.
Leonardo, I think, was very much interested in the way things work.
And you, who say that it would be better to watch an anatomist at work than to see these drawings, you would be right, if it were possible to observe all the things which are demonstrated in such drawings in a single figure, in which you, with all your cleverness, will not see nor obtain knowledge of more than some few veins, to obtain a true and perfect knowledge of which I have dissected more than 10 human bodies, destroying all the other members and removing the very minutest particles of the flesh by which these veins are surrounded, without causing them to bleed. And if you should have a love for such things, you might be prevented by loathing. And if that did not prevent you, you might be deterred by the fear of living in the night hours in the company of those corpses, quartered and flayed and horrible to see. And if this did not prevent you, perhaps you might not be able to draw so well as is necessary for such a demonstration. Or if you had the skill in drawing, it might not be combined with knowledge of perspective. And if it were so, you might not understand the methods of geometrical demonstration. Patience also may be wanting, so that you lack perseverance. As to whether all these things were found in me or not, the 120 books composed by me will give verdict, yes or no.
All his sketchbooks are full of studies of the way things work, the way anatomy works, birds' wings work. But they're also full of studies of the ways in which nature works, the way that the landscape works. And he was definitely, he used art as an aid to a certain kind of science. And in the terms of their own kind of art, children can learn about nature in the same sort of way.
Eddie, you haven't looked at that in the last 5 minutes, have you? Hey? You're busy away drawing diamonds, and if you look at them, they're not at all like you've drawn them. I mean, have you counted how many there are across that you can actually see? It just looks like you're making a pattern.
This whole issue of order, I think, is an important one, because in the art of major artists, there is always this double aspect, the idea that pattern can be challenged by observation. And this is exactly what happens. The power of a drawing, the strength of a drawing, depends upon the intensity of that challenge.
Well, do you want to go and use some colour on it now?
Yes, please.
How will you put it on to what you've already drawn to improve it? Will you just colour over, or will you pick out bits, or rub it in, spit on it?
I coloured bits in without going over the black.
Oh, so you're going to leave the lines, and in fact you're going to colour in these bits. OK, well, I think that's a good idea. You can go and get some yellow and green crayons. You can get on with that. OK, that's come on ever so well, hasn't it, when we started? Really sorted out that bit, yeah? Got that working nicely, and these shapes here. That's better, Eddie. You saved that, didn't you? What do you think? Hey, all right? Is that all? Don't you like it at all? You don't know? What about if I hang it up in the hall? What do you say about it then? No thoughts? I think it's nice. I think you've sorted that shape out of the pineapple really nicely. You want to carry on with it tomorrow? Yeah, OK. And that's nice, Linda.
There's lots of people, lots of sensitive people who can do a lot of things. Play the piano, draw, as kids, you know? They don't grow up, they grow up to be stockbrokers, you know, because they don't have that drive. The motivation that makes them stick at it and the obsession. They don't have the obsession to make art. I mean, who knows? Maybe these people do have the obsession to make art. But meanwhile, in the meantime, they were given some lovely subject matter and a lot of pastel and things. And because of that, and because they're untrained but probably reasonably intelligent, and they looked at things closely and had a lot of fun with the color, you get something very jolly. But you don't get Matisse. You know, you just don't.
I used to draw fruit. If I was staying in a hotel, I started in Santa Monica, staying in a hotel, and I didn't like the view out of the window. I'd tear a page from my pad and stick it in front of me. Then I'd place the fruit on this pad and start drawing it. And one time when I was drawing it, rather realistically, I suddenly realized that, of course, I'm drawing the fruit resting on a piece of paper. And the piece of paper is exactly like the piece of paper I'm drawing on. In short, I'm making a representation of that piece of paper upon this piece of paper. Then I suddenly thought, my God, I've discovered a way how to draw a blank sheet of paper. So the next time, I just took a sheet of paper and put it in front of me, and I didn't put any fruit on it. And I thought, I will make a drawing of this blank sheet of paper, which I did. And I used colours, pinks and blues and little things, so you just see the plane and this piece of paper on it. And then I thought, you can't ask anybody to buy a drawing of a blank sheet of paper. So I gave it to Jane Casman. She's got it on her wall. Maybe some conceptual artists have influenced me a little bit.
I think they might have.
I think an important point about drawing is that it is traditionally always done with a dark medium on a lighter support. That is to say, a dark ink or a dark pencil on a white or tan ground. Therefore, every stroke that you make with the dark has got to have the value of shadow. But one of the interesting things about Rembrandt's drawing style is that he was thinking very much in terms of drawing with the light. And in this drawing, what he has actually laid on are washes and pen strokes which indicate, so to speak, where light does not fall in the first instance. But then in the second instance, they also perform other functions. For example, in the cushion in the foreground, where the mounds of the cushion cross, first of all, across each other, and then across the body, so that you read, so to speak, a sequence of volumes, each of them lit. To make a drawing is a very, very difficult constructive act. You've got to build something up from the white paper. And anybody who sat in front of a piece of white paper and said, now I've really got to construct an image, will know what that means. It really is quite a difficult thing to do. Obviously, one can learn certain techniques, like, for example, imitating the superficial appearance of the tones of an object, if it's in front of your eyes. But then imagine to yourself not having an object in front of your eyes, and then having to construct an entire image. Now, in this Leonardo drawing, the interesting thing is that he wasn't drawing in front of an actual landscape. He was drawing out of his imagination. So as well as creating the image of the landscape, he was actually inventing it at the same time. But if you held it up beside a landscape, it wouldn't actually look like a landscape at all. It looks like a lot of scribble on a paper. And that, of course, is the truth about drawing. Drawing is signs and symbols which are assembled on the paper to look like something. When one comes to a Rembrandt drawing, like this one, even though this drawing was probably done in front of an actual landscape, you'll see that in fact it really doesn't look like an actual landscape at all. The landscape is conveyed to you by a whole series of graphic symbols, abrupt pen strokes, smears of ink, which make you remember in your own mind, makes you bring up from the back of your own memory all sorts of recollections that you have, which those signs stimulate. You, so to speak, read into these signs their meaning, just as you read into a word on a page its meaning. You use your memory to enable yourself to see what the artist meant. And that is really one of the great skills of the artist. You can do it with landscape, you can do it with figures, and of course it's the essential art of drawing. Now this drawing by Van Gogh shows marvellously what drawing can do and no other medium can. It's full of lines, chalk lines, which express movement and life. And that movement and life isn't only in the figure of the sower who's sowing the seed, it's actually in the field upon which he's working. You feel that the whole thing is imbued with the life of the soil, which he was very much aware of. And of course there's even an attempt in the clouds to draw the weather, and to draw the weather not as a sort of stationary phenomenon, but of the weather actually doing it. And it is this feeling of the man sowing, of the field fielding, and the cottage cottaging as verbs, doings, that Van Gogh was always capable of capturing. And many of his late drawings, like this one, are absolutely full of this extraordinary sense of life he felt in nature. And his letters are full of discussions of the difficulty he experienced in trying to find graphic equivalents for those feelings that he experienced in front of landscape, in front of the people who lived and worked in the landscape.
In order to make notes from nature or to make little sketches, a strongly developed feeling for outline is absolutely necessary, as well as for strengthening the composition subsequently. But I believe one does not require this without effort, rather in the first place by observation, and then especially by strenuous work and research. And particular study of anatomy and perspective is also needed. All the time I am working at various heads and hands. I have also drawn some again. Perhaps you would find something in them, perhaps not. I can't help it. Whether people approve or do not approve of what I do and how I do it, I for my part know no other way than to wrestle so long with nature that she tells me her secret. I repeat, I know no other way. I want to make drawings that touch some people. Either in figure or in landscape, I should wish to express not sentimental melancholy, but serious sorrow. In short, I want to reach so far that people will say of my work, he feels deeply, he feels tenderly, notwithstanding my so-called roughness, perhaps even because of this. I am drudging just now on the figure of a woman whom I saw last winter pulling carrots in the snow. As far as I know, there is not a single academy where one learns to draw and paint a digger, a sewer, a woman setting the kettle over the fire, or a seamstress. In the poorest huts, in the dirtiest corner, I see drawings and pictures, and with irresistible force my mind is drawn towards these things. Look here, Millet has done it, and in general the painters of rural life in this century. They find it more attractive than anything else. How typical that saying is about the figures of Millet. His peasant appears to be painted with the earth that he is sowing. How exact and how true.
Now we know that Millet's feelings before nature and the people who worked in nature were virtually as strong as Van Gogh's, but he found quite different visual equivalents. His signs are not nearly so obvious as Van Gogh's are, but they're no less powerful. And in fact, everyone, professional and amateur alike, has the same problem. They have to look inside themselves, search inside themselves for genuine equivalents not only to the appearances of nature, but to their own experiences in front of that nature, and then record them on the paper.
I prefer to work slowly and get what I can done in detail before starting painting. Well, I'd reckon that if you can't draw, you can't even start to paint. And I'm only sort of learning. So when I can draw, then maybe I'll learn to paint a bit.
I think it's important for all kinds of art, whether you paint or sculpt. But I think one needs drawing.
Can I ask you how long you've been drawing?
For many years.
For many years?
Yes, since childhood.
So you never stopped, really?
I stopped in between and started again during the last 10, 12 years.
I didn't do any drawing for many years, and then just recently took it up again.
What drew you back to it?
I don't know, I just like being out in the open air. I have a number of open air hobbies, fishing, sailing, and drawing is one way of recording my activities and the pleasure I get out of it. Well, it's not a photograph. You put in those parts that strike you as being more important. And there's something much more personal about a drawing than a photograph.
What did you begin with in your drawing?
In this particular drawing, well, I began with the figure because I'm actually a portrait painter, so I'm mostly interested in the human figure and human beings and this sort of thing. And if I do a landscape, I like to relate a figure to the landscape because that, to me, is the focal point of interest in it.
What drew you to drawing, say, in charcoal today rather than pencil?
I prefer drawing in charcoal to pencil because it is much freer and much blacker as well. If I was drawing in pencil, it would take a very long time to sort of build it up.
These people drawing at Kenwood, they are surrounded by what one calls the picturesque. It's a picturesque landscape, a picturesque house, and what picturesque means is like a picture, like somebody else's picture. So in a sense, the whole landscape and the architecture, the house in its setting, has been actually originally composed by the architect and the gardener to look like a picture, probably a picture derived from the 17th century paintings of Claude Lorrain or something like that. And so people who are sitting drawing here will be naturally feeling themselves, so to speak, into a certain kind of painting, a certain style of painting. And if you look at a picture by Lorrain, Claude Lorrain, like this one, this marvelous landscape of the Tiber, one can see where the original conceptions of so many of the images that appear in British art, in Gainsborough, for example, come from.
And how would you compare Claude Lorrain and Constable, say, particularly their drawings?
Claude Lorrain was very much interested in a special kind of order which Constable was not interested in. Constable was interested in a kind of immediate vitality that he felt coming out of the landscape. And his drawing technique, with its use of black, dark tones, often rather abruptly brushed on, will convey to you this feeling of sort of life and movement in the English landscape which he felt and which he loved. But with Lorrain, one finds something rather different, which is a very careful ordering and grading of tones. So that one can imagine that he had mixed up tones 1, 2, 3, 4 in his ink beforehand, so he had a kind of tonal scale.
What is the main difference, though, between the European tradition and, say, the Chinese tradition of landscape drawing?
The European artist of all kinds, draftsmen especially, tend to see what we might call the stationary masses of objects, whereas the Chinese are very, very interested in the way in which things in reality persist, carry on. And so they tend always to draw brush lines which convey a sense of movement and passing on through time. We can, of course, find similarities between Eastern and Western art, but I think the differences are perhaps even more important.
The other immediate one that strikes one has to do with perspective.
Well, the whole question of perspective is really related to the use of the drawing machine. In the late 15th century, Dürer and Leonardo were using drawing machines which consisted essentially of a peephole and a frame, a motionless peephole. And all drawing machines which are derived from it, including the camera, tend to have conditioned our Western view of things. And we somehow feel that it's natural and right that the view that we get of the relationships between objects, the relationship in size, for example, of trees to the foreground figures, should be of a certain kind which is given by the machine. And the effect of all this history is to create in Western drawing the effect of distance from the object. There is a kind of space interposed between us and what we're looking at. Now, in other traditions, this mechanical vision has not been introduced. And in Chinese art, one feels that the artist involves himself and any person in his image into the landscape. And in the Chinese tradition, even though they do accept, for example, that people are very small in relationship to mountains, they don't demand that we see everything in this kind of mechanically normal way. And they're therefore able to produce extraordinary effects. For example, if you have a very long, narrow landscape painting shaped like that, you can have a whole series of mountains rising into the sky, or coming down like clouds, so to speak, descending to the earth, which is a very unnatural view, but is nevertheless highly artistic. But of course, another thing about Far Eastern brush painting is its immediacy. When you're painting with a brush in dark ink, like they did, you can't really correct your strokes, and you shouldn't expect to. Now, this actually has a lesson for us, and I think it bears very strongly upon the whole issue of roughness and finish in drawings. People often carry drawings to a point where they have actually spoiled them. Now, that lady who is drawing at Kenwood really shows it beautifully.
I think particularly in a drawing, like in a sketch, it has to be a rather spontaneous sort of thing. One has to see the thing and then put it down, really, I think, as quickly as one can.
Knowing when to stop is probably the most sensible thing to do.
How do you know when to stop?
Ah, that's it, I don't.
I like this one because it's very clean.
One never likes one's own.
Should have been able to do it better.
One has,
I like the approach of that one because he's sort of seeing one thing at a time and not putting in a great effect thing. I like the spaces.
What do you think about a picture of yourself
I'm going to swipe it when we're finished, I hope. I think that's a very nice portrait. Very quickly done. And I wish I could draw in that manner. I think this is the same sort of thing. To be able to do something and produce a finished picture in, well, we've been here half an hour, that's something I'd like to be able to do.
In point of fact, to carry out a drawing is a process in time. And the real charm and beauty of a drawing is that you actually can see the way the point has gone in a certain direction and the way it has led a line, so that your mind sees a little piece out of time, so to speak. And a drawing, because you can read through the last lines towards the very first lines, you can see through them, carries, so to speak, its own history visible in itself, the history of its making. Now, this point is made very beautifully in a drawing by Rembrandt, and then a copy by his pupil. Now, if you look at the original Rembrandt drawing, you can see all the construction lines, the little preliminary strokes that state the relationships and presence of the different components in the design, over which the harder, more complete, more full drawing signs were added. But if you look at the pupil's drawing, you'll see what he has really taken up are the final signs, and you don't see the evidence of the constructive process at work. You can't see this constructive process in most paintings because the painted surface finishes it. You don't see it in most sculptures. And that is why drawing, I think, is really unique. It does give you a sort of view of things through time.
As the drawings develop over the morning, they will accrue into, we hope, a powerful image. I think if people following the development of these drawings could remember the beginning at the end, they might have some kind of clue as to how to read a drawing just from its end product, the end imagery. Now, what about this pose? Do people think this is interesting enough? A bit static? What do you think, Annabelle? You want the weight on both legs? How about you, Judith? Do you think that's... What about you from over there? People happy? Okay, well, let's just draw.
And so each venture is a new beginning, a raid on the inarticulate, with shabby equipment always deteriorating in the general mess of imprecision of feeling. Undisciplined squads of emotion, and what there is to conquer by strength and submission has already been discovered once or twice or several times by men whom one cannot hope to emulate. But there is no competition. There is only the fight to recover what has been lost and found and lost again and again, and now under conditions that seem unpropitious. But perhaps neither gain nor loss. For us, there is only the trying, wrote the poet T.S. Eliot.
One of the things that Delacroix, the great 19th century French Romantic painter, said in his journals was that nature is a dictionary. Now, you never actually write by copying out the dictionary, and I think that the life class should be something in the nature of, well, consulting the dictionary for pieces of information, necessary information that you need in order to make art. And the human body and its various movements, gestures, possible postures and expressions are really the basis of all our artistic thinking.
The vertical of that mullion carries the vertical of his leg right up. Do you see?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking of your architectural drawings that you've done. Well, why not bring all that into one drawing and use your whole strength, Mr. Rawson, which is his strength for light and dark, and don't get, at the moment, too fiddly with this. I like the way you're playing with the sort of geometry of this direction, that one, that one, that one. But I have a feeling the excitement of these shapes here would be enhanced and not diminished by making the floor plane more real. And somehow there has to be a time when you're thinking of the floor in itself. Invent marks for it. Okay, Catherine. Want to be left alone, or do you need advice? All right, I'll leave you alone. Can I have a look? Yeah, I get a look. You can't get the feel of...
You know how feline is?
Feline. You think he's like a cat, has a feline quality. Things like that come out of the actual touch of the charcoal on the paper, don't they? If you could identify the light more, and I feel almost the pressure of the light on that screen behind, almost the pressure of the light falling down on him, and the projection, you know, the light is above. He is projected out towards us by a shadow. I mean, all this. And this is projected back here. So there's an explosive pressure of light down there. I tell you what, I just want to show you two reproductions. So I've got this Daumier book out of the library. I think if I can... Do you like that drawing?
Yes, I do.
I think this is very much your natural mode of drawing, you see. Natural fluency of three-dimensional rhythmic arabesque. I think I put rather interesting roots of that sort of thing in Rubens. And this is his copy of a Rubens.
So how do you think drawing should be taught in art schools?
Oh, I think it should be taught quite academically. Absolutely. All really great draftsmen of the 20th century were taught just academic drawing. And I think that's what you have to do. There's no other way to learn drawing, I don't think, really. The way you were taught drawing, the way I was taught drawing, you would sit and draw like this, and then somebody would come around and point out things you hadn't observed, things you'd got wrong, I mean proportion or something, and that way you learn to look closer. Because it's about looking, you're just simply learning to look.
Can I have a look, guess, in just difficulty to see it at once? My first impression is the fantastic sideways on-ness of the figure. It's almost like a piece of paper seen from the side, isn't he, from here? I love the interaction of form and direction running right up into the roof. I think that's most exciting and a most real response to the thing, and the shadows and everything. Yet it's a little bit, in a sense, talkative, chattery.
I think the most important thing about the life class is that it should give people a kind of repertoire of possible forms. Now, the possible forms that we see in a life class like this, where the model is standing absolutely still, are all absolutely stationary. In contrast to this tradition is Rodin. He saw movement as the essence of life, and so he used to fill his studio with models moving naturally around him. Nude models actually moving, doing things, walking around, sitting down, with their arms around each other or lifting things. It's rather romantically recreated here in this recent film, but he saw that what he wanted to capture was movement in a stationary image, movement in drawing.
Even in those of my works in which action is less pronounced, I have always sought to give some indication of movement. I have very rarely represented complete repose. I have always endeavoured to express the inner feelings by the mobility of the muscles. I have, as it were, to incorporate the lines of the human body, and they must become part of myself, deeply seated in my instincts. I must feel them at the end of my fingers. Now look. What is this drawing? Not once, in describing the shape of that mass, did I shift my eyes from the model. Why? Because I wanted to be sure that nothing evaded my grasp of it. Not a thought about the technical problems of representing it on paper could be allowed to arrest the flow of my feelings about it, from my eye to my hand. The moment I drop my eyes, that flow stops. That is why my drawings are only my way of testing myself. They are my way of proving to myself how far this incorporation of the subtle secrets of the human form has taken place within me. Occasionally I get effects that are quite interesting, positions that are suggestive and stimulating. But that is by the way. My object is to test to what extent my hands already feel what my eyes see.
And I'm particularly interested to see the way in which that girl rejected the idea of the static image and decided to try and capture the sense of movement and activity that was going on in the life class. I think she very much had the right idea.
Right. Ellie, can I have a look at what you're doing? You've been drawing the room, that's right, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the light in the room, the activity in the room. You've got a lovely feeling for the sort of texture of events. It seems to me in some magic way you managed to get the feeling and flavour of the day into the quality of the charcoal you use. I like that very much. I do sympathise with your need to get arms and things more definite and explicit. Still, I like it. I like the texture of it, and I like the activity in it, which is about the activity in the room at the moment.
Now, one of the things that drawing can do that nothing else can is to create a kind of sense of human interaction, of dramatic movement between groups of figures. And in this marvellous drawing by Titian, the first thing you see is the movement rather than the figures. You see the interaction, what's going on. And in many other drawings, especially drawings of the Renaissance, again, you actually perceive what is going on before you perceive the detail represented in the figures. And it's this movement, action and drama in progress that is the real subject of the drawing. You follow a line of meaning between bodies, and you can pick up a kind of human drama which is actually going on, and it casts your imagination backwards in time and forwards in time. You imagine what went before and what is coming after. And in drawings like the work, say, of Delacroix, who usually represented very violently moving subjects, you even feel the realm of space and the realm of time in which the action represented has to complete itself. And we know that Delacroix exercised his hand in drawing every morning in order to get his imagination flowing. And the essence of this kind of drawing is, of course, that it only can come out of the imagination. You can't draw movement and human interaction from figures because it's vanished whilst you're looking. And one finds this particularly in many of the drawings of Rembrandt, where, for example, such a thing as an angel flying away into the sky cannot possibly ever have been seen. It must have been constructed as an image of movement out of the artist's imagination. One can even go back from the composition which involves more than one person, even to the single composition. If you think of a drawing by, let us say, Michelangelo, this marvellous drawing by Michelangelo, which is simply of a single nude human body. It was drawn on the basis of a very great deal of study of the actual human body. He even dissected, so he knew exactly how the muscles worked. But this is not simply a drawing of muscles working. It is a drawing of the human body in a very complex action. It's actually doing something. It's not simply standing, sitting inert, motionless in a kind of neutral environment.
Now, these 7 years spent at the Academy drawing from the model, do you consider them well employed? And would you like to know what I think about it? Said the 18th century French writer, Denis Diderot. It is there, during those 7 laborious and cruel years, that you adopt mannerism in drawing. All those academic positions, strained, prepared, arranged. All those poses coldly and awkwardly taken up by some poor devil. What have these to do with the positions and actions of nature? Not a thing, my friend, not a thing. I knew a young man of much taste who, before touching the least stroke to his canvas, would fall on his knees and say, "Lord, deliver me from the model." It is not in school that you learn the general fitting into each other of movements, a fitting that is felt and seen, that extends and winds from head to foot. Go tomorrow to the public house, seek out public sights, be observers in the streets, in parks, in markets, in houses, and you will gain just ideas of true movement in the actions of life. An attitude is one thing, and action is another thing. Every attitude is false and little. Every action is beautiful and true.
Is that the best you can do?
It's about the best I can do, yeah.
I've seen better.
Eh? Well, I'll get a bit drunk and then I'll do you again, all right?
You're on sound, aren't you?
Yeah. It's academic drawing, you know, Danny, that's what we're doing. It's academic, you know.
What's this red nose?
That's about 3 o'clock.
I'm a star.
I started in a Percy V. Bradshaw's Pest Art School course. You too can learn to draw. You know, that's how I started. Yeah, I did this course and when I was in the forces. And it sort of kept me off the streets, you know. And I used to draw in pubs for pints and things like that, start drawing people. And that taught me a lot about character and everything. It's you, then.
We talk about handy. What are you grumbling about?
You feel it's got...
I think that it's a good likeness. It's very good.
I've got your hat right, haven't I?
Oh, yeah, you put the hat on. Very hat.
Yeah, that's like it. That's better looking than what he is now. Oh, that's me. It's you, Molly. I know that's me, yeah.
I'm not there to flatter, and at the same time, I'm not there to just be purely jolly. There's something in me which says, well, I'll try and capture something of the essence of the person, even though it's not capturing all of it. One I really felt tender about was the man who was going blind. The general ambience was right, and I tried to draw him, and seemed to be one of the most successful. The drawing is cruel, but it's not, there's a little bit of compassion in somehow, and it was him, and I didn't want to be sentimental. But at the same time, I loved the man.
Isn't it? Right? That's him all over.
I was really keen to learn to draw because I suddenly realized early on, rather than, it wasn't just cartooning, you know, which I seem to be leaning towards. It wasn't just a matter of making a little picture and putting a caption underneath, whilst it's that perfectly adequately. It's also something else, I suddenly realized, that it's a vehicle for expression of some sort or another, protest. You know, it actually is a way of saying something which you can't necessarily say in words. Once I did a drawing of people without legs and arms, and they were sitting on the pavement begging and so forth. And the picture was rather unpleasant, horrific. And after I crossed it out as a drawing, I wanted to destroy the thought, if you like, that it didn't exist. But it does exist. And I rejected it by crossing it out. And the pen absolutely communicated the feeling I wanted to express. I knew that I couldn't go on the rest of my life drawing something which would just fill a space. Well, it was such a fantastic medium for conveying an idea of some sort. You could almost sit down at the board in the morning and express the way you felt that day, put it down as a drawing. And that often happened that way, what to do today.
Did you in fact start drawing like other people start drawing in life classes and so on?
Yes, I did a lot of that. The Victorian Art Museum mainly. I had a terrific teacher, a guy called Leslie Richardson, who still teaches at London College of Printing, London College of Printing. And he really taught me a lot about continuity of things. That is, rather than one idea often off something, to develop the idea further and to take it into some other way, you know. I mean, I suppose a lot of artists do variations on a theme, but developing a series often brings out things which you wouldn't have thought of otherwise, because you go through a progression. And what you may not get in one drawing, you will eventually develop in another way. No, well, I did then, but I often did drawings in life classes and simultaneously tried to draw it in caricature, the same pose. And that was quite interesting to see the two, you know. But the caricature I noticed was always a lazier drawing. You see, the thing I think I probably always try to avoid is doing the fait accompli type drawing, the one you know is going to work. I've always been more interested in being perverse. Often the academic part comes in subconsciously, and you really are drawing, but you're drawing with a little more bite somehow. You're not inhibited anymore because you decided somehow earlier on you were going to draw like a child a bit. You're going to try to just draw it as it comes out, and the hell with it. If it's going to do it, it's going to do it. If it doesn't, well, I can always try again, you know, do another one.
Yeah, but what's so unique about drawing as opposed to other techniques?
They're very personal, private activity of an artist trying to express something in his mind that he can't say in any other way, really. He's an artist, he uses a line. And its uniqueness is something to do with a fundamental activity. There's something that goes back to the cave paintings, you know, the fundamental activity of actually trying to lay a ghost or exercise oneself or something, you know, get it out of one's system. And the best drawings I've found are those where you're pent up, unhappy with the state of things, or you have a feeling about a particular person or movement, and it just stays with you like some sort of beast, you know, it won't go away in your mind. And you've got to get it out of yourself, and if you don't get it out, it can make you more unhappy, which is often why artists commit suicide, I don't know. You're married to it until it's over. I actually don't think I like drawing. I mean, it's always a pain, you know, I just put it off. I'm going to make another coffee or do anything, you know, go out down the road or buy a paper. Anything to avoid facing having to do it. Because it really is a pain trying to do it. I mean, at the moment, I'm uncomfortable at the moment trying to do it simply because it's not over the top yet. There comes a point, I think, in a drawing where you somehow know it's going to work, and it doesn't always happen.
But if drawing's going well, is it one of the most exciting?
Oh, it's very exciting, man. I think, in fact, the adrenaline that you get from that is as good as any kind of drug you can get involved in, you know. Somehow, I do love it when I get into it, and when it starts to begin with me, that is, a dialogue with it, me and the drawing begins, and I love drawing.
One of the most striking things about drawing today is that in caricature, cartooning, it still has a very continuing force. That caricature can take a line and impose it, as it were, around a person's personality and embed him in a kind of image. Do you agree with that?
I do. I think cartoon is one of the places where most people who are not particularly interested in non-figurative art will accept quite extreme distortions. Distortions which are used for expressive purposes. And that, of course, is what the caricature artist, the cartoonist, always does. He picks upon certain attributes and then exaggerates them, usually by making them big in relationship to the rest of the body. And I think probably the very best cartoonists pick upon physical attributes which somehow or other show the inner nature, the real character of the person.
The other thing, though, it does is make the unimaginable real, just in the same way as Bruegel did, or Bosch did too.
Yes. And one of the ways it does this, and again here it can actually illuminate the meaning of all drawing, is by making analogies between what it is drawing and other things in the natural world, once again, which people will accept. And another thing about caricature of this kind is that you do need a certain amount of objective knowledge in order to understand what the drawing means. You've got to know who's represented, and you've got to know a bit about the way he presented himself to the people in order to get the point. But when you come to another kind of drawing that may look superficially like cartoon, like these magnificent drawings by Goya, you do not need that kind of objective information. All you need in order to understand the expression is your general human experience. And that is sufficient to enable you to read this drawing. And it's the immediacy of drawing that can give us a real insight into the rather extreme states of mind that some of Goya's drawings represent. But if you go to Daumier, you find that he actually used both kinds of caricature. He did do some caricature based upon the exaggeration of a single feature, but on the other hand, a very great deal of his work was based upon appealing to our common human experience in the same way as some of Goya's work does. And Baudelaire noticed this particularly.
But now I want to speak about one of the most important men, I will say not only in caricature, but in the whole of modern art. I want to speak about a man who each morning keeps the population of our city amused. A man who supplies the daily needs of public gaiety and provides its sustenance. You will have guessed that I'm referring to Daumier. This artist does not search for an idea. It would be truer to say that he just lets it slip out. His caricature has a formidable breadth, but it is quite without bile or rancour. In all of his work there is a foundation of decency and simplicity. As an artist, what distinguishes Daumier is his sureness of touch. He draws as the great masters draw. His drawing is abundant and easy. It is a sustained improvisation, and yet it never descends to the chic. He has a wonderful and almost divine memory, which for him almost takes the place of the model. All his figures stand firm on their feet, and their movement is always true. His gift for observation is so sure that you will not find a single one of his heads which jars with its supporting body. To conclude, Daumier has pushed his art very far. He has made a serious art of it. He is a great caricaturist.
Of course, there is what one can call positive and affectionate caricature. But in point of fact, artists find it very difficult to discover something upon which they can focus their art and about which they can express positive feelings. It's very, very easy to find things that you hate and to express, horror, despair, misery, the misery of the world, but to find something to which you can say unequivocally, yes, this I really believe in, and express those positive feelings in your drawing, well, that's very, very difficult indeed.
Do you think that one of the reasons why quite a lot of modern artists came back to drawing is actually what they're trying to recover is almost the activity itself?
I absolutely agree. That is it. The activity itself, but also an activity which brings you into a position to be able to express something positive.
Is the immediacy of drawing one of the things that attracts you strongly to it?
Yes, and I don't mean the quickness of drawing. I mean the fact that you can take your finger and make a drawing. That's what I mean. You don't have to mix up paint. You don't have to wait for things to dry. It's a direct thing to do. It seems to me to be a rather primary act. And since I'm rather primary, it suits me.
Now, I noticed that you rub now so hard that the paper begins to disintegrate. Is that why you really need a very thick paper, because you want it
No,
to
but some harder surface papers wouldn't do that. And I like that it comes off in those big pieces. I just happen to like the look of a surface that has been erased and left, and it's a kind of like a strata. I think it enriches the surface, and ultimately, if the drawing works at all, it will make it a richer drawing to look at. It's about the history of the drawing. I like to leave the history in.
Do you find there's a moment in a drawing when the drawing, as it were, takes over?
The drawing takes over? Happens on and off all the time, I think. And you don't need to deal with it or think about it or talk about it, because it's just going to happen because of your knowledge. That's, like in you, in your hands. It's about inventing. That's where the fun happens, and the excitement of inventing things. It's about concentration, which I've taught myself. I've taught myself the concentration mainly through running, so that I know that if I can breathe a certain way and run for a certain distance with ease, I know also I can sit a certain way and force my mind to look.
Are you very conscious of tradition when you draw?
I don't come from anywhere. It's a question of looking and schooling yourself and learning by assimilating. I happen to be partial to 19th century French drawings. And in the 20th century, I've learned a lot by looking at a lot of Matisse drawings over and over again, and rejecting the things that I couldn't do because I'm not him, obviously, and not French.
Among these pictures, which I have chosen with the greatest care for this exhibition, there are 4, portraits perhaps, done from my face as seen in a mirror. While the 4 drawings in question are of the same subject, yet no one of these drawings can be superimposed on another, for all have completely different outlines. It is evident that any anatomical, organic inexactitude in these drawings does not harm the expression of the intimate character and inherent truth of the personality, but on the contrary, helps to clarify it. Are these drawings portraits or not? What is a portrait? Is it not an interpretation of the human sensibility of the person represented? Exactitude is not truth. The drawings are always preceded by studies made in a less rigorous medium than pure line, such as charcoal or stump drawing, which enables me to consider simultaneously the character of the model, the human expression, the quality of surrounding light, atmosphere, and all that can only be expressed by drawing. Once my emotive line has modelled the light of my white paper without destroying its precious whiteness, I can neither add nor take anything away. The page is written, no correction possible. If it is not adequate, there is no alternative than to begin again, as if it were an acrobatic feat. My education taught me an awareness of the different means of expression inherent in colour and drawing. My classical education naturally led me to study the old masters, and to assimilate them as much as possible, while considering such things as volume, the arabesque, value contrasts and harmony, and to relate my reflections to my work from nature. Until the day when I took stock of myself, and realized that for me it was necessary to forget the methods of the old masters, or rather to comprehend them in a completely personal manner. Isn't this the rule of all artists of classical training?
Look at me again. I think really, as I say, she has a very soft face, doesn't she? And somehow representing that in line is really difficult. I mean, Matisse could do it, Picasso could do it. I can't do it, really. Maybe I'm not good enough. I should practice more on it, but not in front of television cameras. Yes. Drawing isn't always with lines, though, is it? Do you know Seurat's drawings?
Yeah, they're marvellous.
And Seurat said he would no more think of beginning with a line than beginning with a big brush in his drawing. I work another way. I always begin with lines, even if I'm drawing in tone.
In the painting that you're doing at the moment of yourself, you're playing all the time with all kinds of visual conventions. Do you find in drawing you're not so impelled, though, to do that?
Well, the painting, after all, is more a planned, conscious thing. Drawing, it's more like note-taking or something, you see. You don't do drawing as consciously as that, as making a painting. Although I did some drawings this summer before I began those etchings of the blue guitar, which are just invented, totally invented drawings. You know, they don't refer to anything in front of me.
How interested are you in the symbolizing force of drawing? Trying to find some kind of symbol for hair or water or...
Well, you have to do that all the time. You just shout that. Just keep your lips down. And it's especially if you've got like 5 more minutes left, she says, and you have to draw the hair in. I don't know what I'm going to do, how I'm going to do it, even. Yeah, I'll try.
Quite a lot of modern painters, as it were, question the kind of traditions within which you work. Does that worry you or not?
No, not at all. What, you mean they think it's bad to sit and draw somebody like Celia?
And they also think that particular kind of tradition of art has been...
Well, it's been done too much.
And, yeah.
Too many Mona Lisas. Doesn't matter, what's it matter, I mean.
Are you interested in kind of conceptual art very much?
I'm really interested in visual art. If it's not very visual, I'm not that interested in it. If it's visual, I am.
What, in fact, do you think of that
very large wall drawing consisting of nothing but straight lines by the American Sol LeWitt, which used to be at the Museum of Modern Art in New York.
Well, it's an interesting idea, but it's not the Mona Lisa, is it?
But what interests me about Sol LeWitt is that he's deliberately reduced his technique to the minimum, that is to say straight root lines, and he is doing something which he himself is quite clear about. It has a tradition behind it, he has grown out of a tradition, and what he is making is something analogous to a field, rather like a field of sound as one might make it in music. Here he is making a field of tone. And it is conceived so mathematically and schematically that it can actually be carried out by other people. And the source of this idea is in the constructivist manifesto of the Russians in the early 20s.
The plumb line in our hand, eyes as precise as a ruler, in a spirit as taut as a compass. We construct our world as the universe constructs its own, as the engineer constructs his bridges, as the mathematician his formula of the orbits. We renounce in line its descriptive value. In real life there are no descriptive lines. Description is an accidental trace of man on things. It is not bound up with the essential line and constant structure of the body. We affirm the line only as a direction of the static forces and rhythm in objects.
Mondrian also questioned the representational tradition, but in rather different terms, and you can see exactly how he did it by comparing these two drawings. Now, the interesting thing is that in Mondrian's abstract derivation from the church tower, he of course adds a very large number of transverse rhythms. There's far more in that composition than there is in the representation of the church tower. And this is, of course, what he is actually doing. He is creating what one can call a rhythmical composition. It's almost as though he was, so to speak, taking the church tower as an initial impetus for his invention and then producing an extraordinary elaborate set of drum beats, rhythmic intervals, based upon the original idea. And the musical analogy can help very much to explain the nature of a lot of modern drawing. And once you've got this idea of developing a visual field, analogous to a musical field, you can apply it to all sorts of things. You can apply it, for example, to very simple everyday objects, as Jasper Johns does, so as to invest them with a new significance, make you see them in a new way. But you can also use, as Robert Rauschenberg does, magazine images, publicity images, everyday things, and give them the same sort of ambience and lift them to a new level of meaning.
Do you like Rauschenberg's drawings and Jasper Johns a lot?
Well, I think John's drawings come from a rather classical tradition, and, well, I mean, I know they do, in the sense that he's looked a lot at Leonardo, and Duchamp, who also did. And they venerated the diagram, the offhand, accidental diagram. For instance, they would look at a sketch of a bomb or a circuit, something like that, and they'd say, oh, it's beautiful, what a drawing, you know, or they'd say, you'd see a formula on a blackboard, you know, you'd say, fantastic, you know, isn't that beautiful? So that they showed another way of looking at something, and this could be called a drawing. And then Rauschenberg, by taking a lighter fluid to a lacquer thinner to magazines, and then like that frottage technique, rubbing across it, it did have the aspects of old drawing with a kind of new drawing. I just want something more from drawing than that. I'm no longer concerned with popular images, the images the populace makes. I'm not blind to that nor snobbish about it. It's just that I'm asking for more. What I'm drawing is how I feel about humans. I drew objects for years because I could not sit in the same room with a model for a variety of reasons, one of them being that the model eventually has to move and has to leave. So I devised other things to do, other ways to draw, until I was able, emotionally even able, to sit down and look at a figure to draw.
But if you look at your tool drawings,
yes,
it's about, it seems to me, about how graphic language can make human and make vital something as dead as a pliers or a hammer or a saw.
The
inhuman
drawings,
in that sense.
the tool drawings, or any involvement with the tools, paintings or the constructions, was a metaphor for humans. In fact, the tool drawings led into this because I got better at it. I wanted to make proper drawings. I didn't just want to flatten out a tool and put it on the thing and say, that's a drawing now, and that which was thought to be terribly radical, that I did this thing, that I made I made a drawing of an axe, and and everyone's, so how beautiful, and it wasn't an axe lying down with an illusion, it was just the axe itself put up there like a sign. Well, that's all well and good. I think they're rather handsome, I think, at times, but I don't think it's as handsome as the drawing of a person. And as I say, it's not like that I'm anti-abstraction or modernism or whatever it is. It's just that, for me, I found a way that I can speak that interests me, and I can speak with as little bullshit as possible. I'm not interested in chronicling the age. I am interested in making a body of work that when one comes upon it, it's disturbing, in the sense of not that something would be horrible or obviously disturbing, but disturbing because you would recognize in it something of yourself or the way you felt about looking at things or how you felt about people.
It seems to me in your present drawing that you're almost kind of dredging your own response to European painting and drawing. And in this sense, at least, it seems that you're quite similar to your contemporary Claes Oldenburg.
I think Oldenburg is a great draftsman because he's a draftsman in a mainstream of tradition. The others have broken with it, and then there are those who say, well, then they should have, and that's the extension of history, and therefore they're in the avant-garde. But I've lived with some of those drawings, and they aren't as generous. They aren't as generous as other drawings are. And I like the fact that Oldenburg can do absolutely anything he wants with his hands. And I find that amazing, because for me it's a great struggle. He really is, he's like a great athlete. He can do just what he wants.
After I decided to become an artist, having been a newspaper reporter, I worked for a while in an advertising agency in Chicago, and the only account they had of any significance was an insecticide account. And most of what this insecticide did was to kill boll weevils. Very frequently I was employed to draw boll weevils. At this point I don't really remember what a boll weevil looked like, but I have a general idea that it has a sort of a vacuum cleaner nose and that it's rather fuzzy. Well, bread is one of my favorite subjects, and I've done it in many different ways. I've done raisin breads and rye breads and white breads in all different sizes and different materials. The most recent use of the subject is to transform the subject by using granite. I think that comes about because of a coming together in my mind of the shape of bread as it's sliced, a slice of bread, and the look of a tombstone. For some time I couldn't find the connection until I went to Japan and bought a certain kind of bread there called English bread, which is elongated and does look a little bit like a tombstone. Like, to draw properly is really a fascinating thing to learn. And there aren't too many rules really in drawing. I mean, it's a sort of a thing that you practice over and over again, and then one day it starts to work. And that's fascinating. A drawing looks one way when you're making it, and then it looks another way later in the day or the next day or after some kind of experience. And it always looks different if someone else looks at it. I keep making adjustments to the drawing until it looks right in all possible ways.
And is Giacometti someone you admire a lot?
Fantastic. I have him pinned up all over my house. Everywhere I can put a Giacometti reproduction, I pin it up.
Giacometti said that at the beginning of his life, he thought he could do everything. He was so good. And then it was towards the end of his life, he thought he couldn't do anything at all.
I know the feeling. But when you're a 17-year-old boy, you do think you can do everything. I have one at home. He absolutely thinks he can do everything. He's full of shit. So is Giacometti. You can't do anything when you're 17. It's when you think you can't, but you have those powers, you know? It's just nice to think that, though. It's lovely to be 17 and think you can do everything.
If only one could draw. I can't. That's why I keep on drawing. As a young man, I thought nothing was impossible for me. I thought I was great. I thought nothing was impossible for me with that wonderful technique, drawing, and I thought I could copy absolutely anything and that I understood it better than anybody else. That feeling lasted until I was 17 or 18 years old. Then I suddenly realized that I could do absolutely nothing, and I asked myself the reason. I decided to work to find out why. When you look at a face, you always look at the eyes. Even if you look at a cat, it always looks you in the eye. And even when you look at a blind man, you look where his eyes are, as if you could feel the eyes behind the lids. Every word I write shows only my vanity, my pretentiousness, my hypocrisy, even my pleasure at being witty and startling people, all qualities I was proud of showing off when I was 12 years old. Luckily, a long interval came afterwards. It lasted really until the very last years. But now I'm the person I was when I was 12. Not completely. I've made tremendous progress. Now I can get somewhere only by turning my back on the goal. I can create only by dissolving. I don't know. Am I a comedian, an idiot, or a scrupulous fellow? I only know that I've got to keep trying to draw a nose from nature.
Francis Bacon told me he thought Giacometti was better than Picasso, better draftsman than Picasso, which I can't see that at all. And can you? What do you think? He's good, but he doesn't have the range, does he? Picasso can draw so many ways.
Picasso could do kind of anything.
He could do everything. That's a different story, though. When he was 12, he could do everything, it looked to me. But that's a rare case. Jesus, that's...
But Picasso has that rather odd role. He can do so many things, but he doesn't really have the same kind of personal relationship to modern artists as other painters.
It's hard to relate to somebody that's super. That's so far ahead of everything else.
Well, Picasso, of course, was a phenomenon. He was a tremendous entertainer. There's no question in my mind, but that a lot of Picasso was definitely meant to be amusing. On the other hand, of course, a lot of it is very, very serious. He had a very wide range of emotion. His pictures are full of multiple metaphors, full of ambiguities. For example, you'll find that a figure will start off very, very solid and plastic at one end, and at the other end will become a kind of firework display of flat diagrammatic forms. And Picasso was very largely responsible for the actual destruction of the old idea that one has to accept a specific view of the world, particularly the camera's eye view, as absolute. He personally felt free, almost in an anarchic way, so to speak, to do what he wished with natural appearance.
Oh, I like that hand up there. Can you just leave that? I'll draw it up there. 2 more minutes.
Why do you particularly like that hand? What suddenly?
It somehow it went with the face. It's terribly drawn, won't be? I don't know. One's working at a slight disadvantage here because people keep asking you questions. And I don't normally work like that. I work in silence. I never play music or anything. Normally.
John Rose here.
Who?
John Rose, he wanted to read some coffee to you.
Could you ask him if he could call back later?
Yeah. Could you call back later?
Do you feel like those people
I
outside the
feel
National
like,
Portrait
yeah,
Gallery?
I do. I feel like I'm at Blackpool. So. Yes, missus, it'll be ready in a minute. Yes.
Do you find hands particularly difficult?
Not particularly, but today I am. Well, I mean, obviously, because you all are filming and things like that, it is difficult to concentrate. And hands, more than anything else, seem to either fall into place or don't. And just keep going back to it.
How long do your drawings normally take you?
Recently, of late, in the last few years, they've taken me 6 months over a period. I mean, it's not working on them every day, but it's when I...
Is it 25?
Yeah.
Okay. That's quite sweet, that. I like the colour.
Well, we could have done a better one.
What do you think of it?
Well, it needs another hour. That's what it needs on it. But, I mean, the hair, I could draw the hair carefully.
That's quite nice, actually.
Can't you ring up the... Yeah. Can't you tell them to give them extra lessons? Drawing lessons, yeah.
Thank you, David.
Well, it's not easy drawing with a camera at that.
Why are you leaving it at this point?
Because I have to have the time to go away from it and look at it again. You know, by itself, without you and without the model and with everything, just by myself. And I will make changes then, but they'll be formal changes. They won't be emotional changes. There'll be things that'll make a picture rather than a likeness, necessarily.
Do you think it's more difficult to be a draftsman now? That there are points of departure are so many, you don't inherit any one single tradition?
True, yeah. Well, it's true of painting as well. There's, you know, you have too many choices. After all, in Ingres' day, he didn't have that many choices, did he?